Hey, welcome back, everyone. Dr. Bogosian here. Today, we are going to pick up where we left off in the previous presentation on the morality of abortion. And we're going to look at the other side of the discussion that argues that abortion is not morally permissible. And we're going to do that by unpacking the moral arguments in Francis Beckwith's paper that are direct critiques of Judith Jarvis Thomson's violinist argument, right, that was developed in defense of the moral permissibility of abortion in our previous discussion and in her paper. So if you haven't read both of the papers, please, again, I would prefer that and I think it's best for you to pause the video here, go back and read that first, so you bring those ideas to the presentation. That's going to help you learn the material better, I think, and process as you go, pausing the video as needed to jot notes down. And then also go and make sure you have the handout, the note sheet that is in the modules to help you follow along with this presentation as well. Let me go ahead and pull up our PowerPoint slides, and we're going to jump right in for today. All right. Francis Beckwith, like Judith Jarvis Thomson, is a very influential philosopher in social ethics issues. And he has written not only articles on the immoral nature of abortion or the moral wrongness of abortion, he's also written at least one book on it. Like Judith Jarvis Thomson, he has spoken many places and engaged her in the literature. And so they are one of the reasons I wanted you to read them. One of the handful of reasons is they're two significant figures in this discussion. And so today we're going to look at his moral criticisms of her arguments, and then the additional arguments he develops for the moral wrongness of abortion. We're not going to focus on the legal stuff that he talks about or the ideological things. Those are all very important, and I think you should read them. But we just have enough time to focus in on kind of the moral discussion of this, and then think about questions of how this relates to everything from public policy to social justice concerns and this kind of thing. All right. Critique number one is he says, look, Thomson's paper assumes what is called voluntarism. Voluntarism in ethics is the idea, again, that we have moral responsibility for our actions only if we volunteer for those responsibilities, only if we sign up for them, only if we want them and sign up for them. That's voluntarism, excuse me, is the fancy way to say that. Now, Beckwith is going to argue for us, as he does in the paper, that voluntarism is a false assumption. It's a faulty assumption that the whole violinist example rests on. And so if he can undermine the assumption, he thinks he can in part undermine Thomson's argument. So here we go. Why I think that it's untrue that we have more responsibilities only if we want them. Well, he's going to make the case that we have responsibilities even if we don't want them. So here we go. What are some examples he uses? Well, he says, let's take what we often call deadbeat dads. Let's suppose a woman gets pregnant and the dad doesn't want the baby. And so he says, well, and the woman says, well, I want it. I'm going to keep it. And dad says, well, forget that. I'm out of here. He skips town and goes and makes another life for himself. And he doesn't pay child support. He's nowhere to be found. Now, we have laws, Beckwith says, right, that track morality here. And what the laws do are they hold the dad morally responsible precisely because he's a biological DNA contributor to the production of that child. And that is sufficient, that is enough to pin down his moral responsibility to that child, to help care for it, provide for it, and so on. And so if he neglects those responsibilities, the law believes it is justified to hold him responsible, whether he wants those responsibilities or not, whether he wants to use his energies and resources for the child or not. And so dads, right, fathers of children have obligations even when they don't want them By analogy, a mother has obligations even if she doesn't want them for the same rationale. She is a biological contributor, and the fact that she doesn't want it is insufficient to undermine her obligations. So he thinks we talk too little in this debate about the obligations that dads have, right? We can go so far as to garnish their wages legally. That's where the law, it finds out, let's say that from the mother that he's not paying child support, and then they can contact wherever he works and make it the case that some is taken off the top of his paycheck before he sees it that goes directly to pay child support, right? And I have people in my extended family where that's exactly what happens. And most of us think, yeah, that's exactly the right thing to do. That's morally justified. Why? Well, because the dad owes the child care in the form of at least, financial support. And that's regardless of whether he wants to do it or not. He has those responsibilities. Here's another one. Let's suppose you go to a party and you like to have a good time, and so you throw back a few too many and you make a bad, unwise choice. You get in your car, behind the wheel of the car, and you attempt to drive home. Unfortunately for you and other people, you cause a car crash, and thereby you either severely injure or kill somebody driving drunk. Now, you didn't intend for that to happen. You didn't want that to happen. You don't want those consequences. And you probably, once you become sober, are going to regret it deeply, right? But again, the laws track morality here, and they hold you justifiably accountable and responsible for those results, those consequences, even though you didn't want those things to happen. And even though you don't want to go to jail. And why? Well, that's because you engaged in a particular kind of activity that's a high-risk activity that can have certain negative results, and you're responsible for your choices that you engage in and the activities you engage in. By analogy, we're responsible for engaging in sexual activity and the results that come about, even if we don't want those results to come about, right? And even if we try to prevent them, Beckwith thinks. So if voluntarism is false, then we can have obligations whether or not we sign up for them. And so he thinks abortion is wrong because a mother has obligations whether or not she wants to keep the baby. So wantedness doesn't establish rights and responsibilities. The connectedness to the baby, right, and the nature of the actions establish rights and responsibilities. So children have obligations to parents whether they want them or not. We typically have the moral intuition that it would be the right thing to do to at least help our parents when they're aged, right, and their bodies are falling apart and they can't care for themselves, to help get them in assisted living if we can't take them into our own homes. Okay, it's not the neighbor's responsibility, it's the family's responsibility. Siblings have responsibilities to one another that they don't have to other people their age, and that's because of their biological connectedness to one another. So what Beckwith is trying to point out here is that there's an inherent moral structure in the family unit that by being family, right, a social unit, and biological connectedness pins down, it establishes the rights we have, right, that then give pin down obligations and responsibilities that our family members have towards us that others don't have. And in this case, the mother has it to the unborn, whether or not she wants them. Number two, he builds off point number one by saying the second reason Thompson's argument fails is because we have family obligations, right? What are called filial obligations. We have special obligations to family that we don't have to violinists, to neighbors down the street, and so on. Think about it. I'll use myself here to illustrate it and throw myself under the bus. Okay, so I'm a father of two. I have two young, vibrant children. And I have special obligations to them because they're my children, says Beckwith, because I've helped contribute to producing them. Whether or not I want those responsibilities, whether or not I'm exhausted, whether or not they've tried my patience and now I'm angry, let's say, and I've had enough. I still owe them safety, security, protection, well-being, and all those things. And that's because they're my children. Now, I don't owe the kids on the block that my children play with, I don't owe them the same level of care, security, and responsibility because I'm a third party. I'm not their dad, right? But I have special obligations to them. Now, this is really important because, again, if parents have obligations to children they don't have to other children, children can have obligations, as we've already pointed out, to parents that they don't have to their friends' parents, right? So I have many friends now whose parents are starting to age or have severe health conditions. I don't have obligations to care for them, but my friends do. It typically is a view. At least this is Beckwith's view. Well, why? Well, because it's in virtue of our proximity biologically to our parents that we have those special obligations. Again, siblings. I have siblings, probably some of you do. And so most people, Beckwith thinks I have unique obligations to my siblings that I don't have to other people in our age ranges. So let's say, my brother or sister needs something medically. It would be the right thing for me to promote their medical needs above the needs of others because I'm their brother and I'm in a close proximity to them, right? With all that being said, then the bottom line is that all these moral duties we have to one another within a family unit are grounded, right? They're pinned down by an underlying family moral structure that's natural, that's biologically established. Now, if you want to bring in adoption, he would say the same thing because now you brought the child, adopted the child in the family, so the parents have the same duties to them that they would a biological offspring. If there are other children in the family or other adopted children in the family, they have obligations as well because now they've become family, right? And that's because there's an underlying family structure that's unique and special and natural and that's inherent, right? It's essentially that way. Therefore, the unborn have a right to life and well-being, to not be killed or harmed in any way because of their biological connectedness to the mother and the father that have produced the DNA. Number 3 here, Beckwith says, well, look, filial obligation is there to the unborn on the basis of our filial obligations to our children, our parents, our siblings, and so on. Sorry for the noise there outside. I'm going to put this in. Maybe this will be a little bit better. The unborn, right, have what he calls a natural prima facie right to not be killed. All right, let's unpack that. What does that mean? Natural, it has to do with their biological connectedness to the parents, especially the mother, but the mother and the father. Prima facie, as I believe have used this phrase before this semester, is an initial right at face value. For starters, that right is intact because the baby is biologically related to the mother and the father who've produced it. So initially, it has a right to not be killed by either of them or both of them, right, in conjunction. The violinist, on the other hand, has an artificial, unnatural attachment to you. So here he's going after the analogy in another way and saying it's disanalogous, right? This is not a good analogy. The violinist is not like being plugged into you is not like a pregnant woman. Why? Because it's an unnatural relationship. Yes, they had no right to be there precisely because those are your kidneys and it's not theirs and it's not your sibling and you've been forced against your will. If we take rape off the table, right? Well, even in the case, a violinist case where there hasn't been the forced connection, right? You're not obligated to let anyone use your kidneys and who is not a biological relative. And so it's the artificial nature of the violinist case is so severely disanalogous to the pregnancy case that it doesn't establish the point that Thompson thinks it does. Since human existence depends on time in the womb by its very nature, right? Pregnancy depends on its time in the womb. Your life and mine depend on time in the womb. In its most natural state. Again, let's just set aside for the time being what could happen in a lab with medical technology and reproductive technologies. Okay, he would grant that that's an exception, but what he's talking about right here is the natural rights that we have. Okay, our human existence by nature develops in the womb, depends on the time there, and all of that establishes a natural prima facie right that children have on parents to protect them in the womb and outside of the womb. So let's start outside of the womb. When children are birthed, right, and are cared for and nurtured, they have rights to not be neglected and abused. Why? Well, precisely because I'm their parents and I shouldn't treat them that way. My connectedness to them as their biological father pins down a claim that they have on me to protect them and not harm them.
to provide for them and not withhold their basic necessities. If I neglect those duties, right? Well, then Child Protective Services gets involved and says you haven't met your duties as a dad, and you have now lost your right or rights as a parent because you have violated their rights as children, the natural rights that they have to be protected by you and provided for by you, right? So child abuse. Now, in the case of the unborn, it's no different, right? The unborn have a right to not be abused or neglected. And, you know, if you understand any form of abortion, any form it takes, whether it's the saline form or the use of forceps or the use of a D&E abortion, right, where they use forceps and then, a suction, or a late term abortion, severing you know, the, uh, the brainstem, spinal cord. Okay, that's a violation of the child's right to be protected by the mother and the father. And so if children have a natural claim on the parents, the family has a duty to provide for them and protect them, and abortion violates those duties, or does not fulfill those duties. Now, this doesn't mean families have unlimited duties to one another. Okay, I don't owe my siblings anything they want. If they come and say, "Hey, I want half your paycheck," the fact that they're my sibling doesn't mean that they're entitled to it, right? I don't owe them that. In fact, I don't necessarily owe them my kidney even. I have special responsibilities to them, but if I need my kidneys to stay healthy, I'm not obligated to give them one, right? But it would be okay for me to give them one if I want to, instead of someone down the street. Beckwith things, but I don't have an obligation, right? If my mom will die in labor, okay, by analogy, if a mother will die in labor, now get this, he is a he is very much pro-life, but he doesn't think that a woman would be wrong. Okay, now this is where some pro-life people disagree. Beckwith thinks that if a mother is going to die in labor, she doesn't have to go through with it. So let's imagine a case, right, where it's literally the mother's life or the baby's life. And it's not that the mother wanted an abortion, right? She didn't want to terminate the fetus. Beckwith thinks that it would be right to save one life, okay, not let two die. So he would disagree with some natural law theorists, and which he is among them, who would say, well, no, it's wrong, right? And he thinks it's okay to let die. Okay, this is an important moral distinction. There's a difference between killing, which is the intentional ending of another human being's life. Allowing to die of natural causes would be morally justified. And so let's suppose the woman wants to forfeit her life for the baby. She would be justified to do that. Or if she doesn't want to forfeit her life for the baby, that would be equivalent of allowing the baby to die. The root intention is to save the mother, not end the baby's life. The ending of the baby's life is necessary to save the mother's life. He thinks that that's okay in that special case. But this is so rare these days because of emergency C-sections and medical technology. He thinks it's going to be almost a moot point, but he does think that in really kind of tricky cases where it would be the mom's life or the baby's life, save one would be the principle, and the mother and or the couple have a very hard decision to make. Now, a pushback from the Thompson side would be, okay, well, if you're willing to go that far and say that if the mother's life is physically, literally at stake, she would be justified to allow the baby to die, let's say, or to save her own life at the expense of the baby's. What about in a case of rape where the woman doesn't want the baby? She didn't want this this assault, and she didn't want the result of the assault. Beckwith says, okay, but it's different from the mother's life being at stake, or she could die giving birth. Why? Well, because the baby still has a right to not be terminated. Or if you want to use a cliche, two wrongs don't make a right. It would be wrong to intentionally kill the baby, right? That would be murder. You're ending an innocent baby's life, and the mother's not going to literally die, right, on giving birth. And he thinks there's a difference between the life being at stake in the physical sense, which is his example, right? The mother would die giving birth. The mother should be saved in that case. But if it's just your plans for your future, those can be modified, okay? In fact, they can be modified by carrying the baby to term and giving up the baby for adoption and then going back to what you wanted to do. But he thinks that that would be the best case scenario because we have an obligation to protect that baby, even though it was the product of a horrendous act. And yes, there will be residual trauma for the woman for much of her life or the rest of her life. Um, and he says, look, let's suppose to see this, he says, let's imagine there's a sperm donor, goes down to the sperm bank, donates his sperm, signs off his, his rights. He has no rights or responsibilities or obligations to how that's used once he's donated. That's how these sperm banks normally work. Well, let's suppose a devious doctor takes this person's sperm and forcefully implants it in a woman. And now the woman wants to sue him for child support. And so uh, he um, let's say the woman wins and he gets thrown in jail because he refuses to pay child support because he signed off his rights. So let's say this is a radical miscarriage of justice in the legal system. Would that person be justified to go terminate the baby or terminate the woman and the baby or the doctor because they didn't want that result of their sperm? Well, absolutely not, right? He's not justified to go commit murder because he's being dealt an injustice. By analogy, a woman who's been dealt a grave injustice in a sexual assault is not justified to do something that's a violent assault on an unborn baby, terminating its life. Number four, unplugging or directly killing. This is an important distinction for Beckwith. Again, a way in which he believes the violinist case and pregnancy are disanalogous. They're not the same or even sufficiently similar. Thompson's argument, he believes, actually downplays the nature of abortion, insisting on calling it a fetus, even though she grants personhood. Remember, she grants personhood. She talks about, like unplugging, like you're just literally unplugging yourself from the baby. But that's not what's going on. If you unplug yourself from the violinist is going to slowly fade out of existence. Instead, what's going on, right, is more like if you unplug yourself from the violinist and then you're so mad that you got plugged in the first place, you pull out, your knife and you stab the violinist to death to hasten his death, right? Well, that would be wrong. Beckwith thinks it would be okay to unplug yourself, but it would be wrong to like ensure his death. But that's exactly what happens in the case of abortion. You could unplug yourself from responsibility of the baby after birth by putting it up for adoption, but you're not withholding treatment in abortion, right? As she calls it. You're not withholding basic necessities. You're actually directly killing an innocent human being, right? By you know, dismembering it, using saline to, chemicalize it, et cetera, et cetera. And there's a quote on page 227. You can go read the whole thing that he quotes, but it's the active killing of a human person by burning, crushing, dismembering, and so on. So abortion is a very a violent, graphic, intense procedure, right? It's not like at all like unplugging a violinist. It's an active, intentional taking of an innocent person's life. It's not withholding treatment. The bottom line for Beckwith is abortion is morally wrong in nearly all cases, probably 99% of cases, because it actively intentionally kills an innocent human person, which they both granted, who has an initial prima facie right to be protected by the parents whom they're naturally dependent upon. Now, with that being said, I'm going to play a short clip for you by a person. It's an interview with a former abortion doctor, Dr. Anthony L. I think it's Levatino. He has some really interesting things to say. He performed hundreds of abortions before changing his mind. Okay. For years, this is what he did. And I want you to listen to his story because I think this is really interesting. He's not only going to tell you what an abortion is, right? A D&E abortion. He's going to explain to you why he changed his mind and why he thinks you and I should too. So he has come to agree with Beckwith. Here we go. Okay, we're going to go ahead and bring this bring this discussion to a close. I hope you found that interesting and thought provoking. There's a lot to think about here. Uh, Francis Beckwith is very, as you can imagine, sympathetic with the things that you just heard in this interview with Dr. Levatino. And they want you to understand what it is we're actually debating. So it's not just being debated kind of abstractly and disconnected from the practice. But the takeaway for Beckwith is that women do not have a right to choose to intentionally kill an innocent unborn human being. Instead, the baby has a right to life, and we have other options in terms of what happens after the baby is carried to term. In fact, Beckwith has, in many places, written that we need to do a better job, right, of rallying around women who have a baby and then decide that they just can't keep it, right? They can't afford to keep it, or life circumstances are such that they wouldn't be the best mom for the baby. And he thinks we need to do better at promoting abortion, making it, excuse me, boy, that was a faux pas, promoting adoption and making it more affordable and making it an easier process for families who do want to adopt and who, let's say, are childless, right, and want to have a family. We need to have charities, more charities that step up in our crisis pregnancy centers, provide financial services for women who are in process of carrying a baby to term. If it's a case where they've been traumatized and the baby is a result of the trauma, then providing psych services immediately and then for long term as long as is needed. Providing clothes and diapers or what have you, right? And so he thinks that that would be a way we could socially rally together, right, to really promote all of life in its richest form, and not to just, as the criticism of his side is often leveled, be pro-birth. He's going to go to great lengths to say that that's just not true. To be pro-life is to promote the life and well-being of the baby, both in the developmental stages and then after birth, and to promote the life and well-being of the mother. Thanks so much for thinking about these things. Next week, we're going to start on our next topic. And so be looking for an announcement related to that. Take care.